G'day everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Let's Do Another Take. Oh, they're beautiful.
They are beautiful.
I love the fact that you make them dance.
Oh, well, how can you not?
In today's episode, I was so excited to talk to this man. This is Dr. Alex Koefman, and Alex is a neurosurgeon. So he operates on people's brains. On top of that, some would say, ironically, he's a drummer. And we spoke about just so many amazing things. I asked him what happens to the brain when he's playing the drums. I asked him what it's like to cut someone's skull off and look at their brain while he's having a conversation with them. And it just blew my mind, this conversation. He's just a lovely, lovely bloke. And obviously a genius. So sit back and relax and prepare to be blown away by the amazing Dr. Alex Koefman. My friend, what was the first album or single that you ever owned?
Oh, I do know the answer to that. It was Dave Matthews Band, Crash.
Nice.
And the way that came about was, it was marketing, but God, it was good. When I was a kid, I'd have those Zildjian magazines, and they'd have like every symbol in the magazine that you could ever possibly just drool over these incredibly beautiful artistic hammering of metal and look at it and go, wow. And you almost try to create the sound of the symbol in my head looking at it. But there was an artist preview, and then down on the bottom, I remember it was down the bottom right-hand corner, I even remember the caption. It was like almost 35 years ago. It's like, "Hey, do man, one of the most popular drummers to come along in a long time, Carter Beaufort of the Dave Matthews Band." I don't know what I sort of just looked at that and thought, you know what, I'm going to check him out. And and then it was obviously back in the days of CDs. So I ordered the CD and it arrived, and the anticipation, like it was the first CD I'd actually bought.
Wow.
And the Crash album opens with acoustic guitar. So I was ready for this amazing drum solo to start this song. And then it's like, it's like, oh, it's a major disappointment. It's like, where's the drums? And then the drums came in this really simple beat. And I was like, oh, this is not so great. What have I done? I just wasted my money. And then as the album went through and I got to appreciate what Carter was actually doing.
What he was bringing to it, yeah.
Oh, my goodness. It was just... And I reckon Crash is still one of my favourite albums of all time. Yeah. And
so you were drum obsessed before you got your first album?
Oh, I was drum obsessed from 4.
Is that right?
Yeah. Like, I would have had a drum kit at 4 if I hadn't been mean to my sister. Dad's like, "You're not having a drum kit till you're nice to your sister." That's the excuse. I think it was because he probably couldn't afford it, but I got it when I was 7, and that was that was the greatest moment of my life for waking up, because my birthday's the 24th of December, right, day before Christmas. So I woke up on the 24th, and I pulled back the curtains, and then Mum and Dad have bought this drum kit, and they've set it up just behind the curtain in my bedroom. And that is a memory that I'll never forget. I can still see, if I close my eyes now, I can still see that image and remember that feeling. Wow. And I was like, I've got it. Just one of those dream things you get. Like, since I was 4 to 7, I dreamt about having a drum kit. I watched this guy at a church that we used to go to, and I used to just watch, and it was just mystical and just magical. And all of a sudden I had it. And it was, I was drum obsessed from the beginning.
It was probably the best day of your sister's life as well, by the sounds of things.
That's right. She's had good behaviour.
Or did that mean that from that moment on you could go back to being a dick to your sister again?
That's right. Once I had the drum kit, there was nothing to lose.
Nothing holding you back.
That's right, yeah.
What kind of kit was it?
It was a pearl, and it was one of those. It was pearly white. I don't know what it's called, but it's the white where it's not a plain white. It's sort of like that crystal white, or not even the crystal. It's the bits of white are all chopped up. It's there's a name. Is it like
a pearloid finish?
That's probably the right way to describe it. Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
It's beautiful. But it was a hybrid.
I mean,
like, it wasn't the pure kit. I mean, the person Mum and Dad bought it off, they'd sort of, it was a bit like an aftermarket. There was a bit of this and a bit of that. But most of it was pearl, and most of it was in that beautiful pearl white.
I think they probably did you a real favour getting you a good quality second-hand kit rather than a cheap new one.
I think you're spot on, actually. I think you are spot on, yeah.
Because the real cheap kits are just crap. And they can never sound good.
No. And also, as a kid, it was burned into my brain what a good kit looked and sounded like, because I'd watched this guy play, and everything from the rim shot to what the cymbal looked and sounded like, and the tom, particularly the tom, sounded like. So it would have been nothing but disappointment. Like, even at 7, I was acutely aware of what it meant to look like, sound like, feel like. So I think you're right. Yeah. So it was beautiful. Unreal. Beautiful.
I used to work at Taramara Music Centre in Sydney, and some parents brought their son in, and they said, now, he wants to get a guitar. It's his first guitar. And I said to him, okay, what kind of guitar do you want? And they answered on his behalf, and they said, he wants a red one. Can you tell him that colour isn't important? And I said to them, no, I can't, because if he wants a red guitar, the most important thing that you have to be aware of is you got to buy a red guitar. If that's what he's dreamt about, make sure it's red, for God's sake.
It's so true. It's such an important part of the psyche of getting an instrument, isn't it? It's if it's not what it's meant to be, it kind of ruins the whole thing. But it's I wanted my cymbal to look like the guy that I watched play, and it was really shiny. So I used to get the Brasso and polish my cymbal with Brasso until it was it was like a mirror finish.
Yeah, nice.
But
so you were 7 when you got this kit. What happened initially? Because you strike me as someone who kind of plunges into anything that you take on. Were you obsessed with drums and practice?
Obsessed. Even to the point where I used to, again, watching this guy set up his kit and pack it up, I used to spend hours setting it up and then taking it down and packing it up and then just setting it up again and just packing it. Because that was all part of the magic of it. But my dad was a pianist, and he was studying to be a concert pianist but never got there. So he would play the piano at home, and I would play the drums at home. And we lived in a place called Osterley, which had about a population of 5. It's in the middle of Tassie. Like, there's literally nobody there. So I had no bandmates. I had no bandmates.
Can you hear the Renaults in the background? Sorry about that.
It's going to look amazing. So Dad used to play the piano, and he used to play a lot of gospel stuff and a lot of classical, and I used to play along with him. And that was good and bad. Like, it would have been great to have played in a band at that early stage and just got used to playing with different people, getting better at keeping time and just listening to other people. But the good thing about playing with Dad was melody. So a lot of the gospel stuff and the classical stuff was about melody, and so I really tuned into that. And even now, a lot of stuff I listen to when I play the drums to something, I'm not even listening to the bass guitar. I'm really just listening to the melody of the whole thing, and that really dictates what I try to play. And I'm really sort of melody focused. Yeah, I mean, I will tap incessantly to a rhythm that's in my head, but melody's the thing that really gets me about any tune that I listen to. I think that comes from playing with Dad.
Yeah, that's unreal. I have a thing for song drummers. And it sounds like that's what you're describing, and that a song drummer doesn't think, what standard, drum beat can I play? They listen to the song and they play the song, and a big part of that is accentuating the melody, obviously. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. Carter's a great example of that. I mean, he's a busy drummer. He plays a lot of stuff, but one thing he's not guilty of is going above and beyond. It's just so musical. I mean, all these accents really follow the melody of the song. I listen to my partner listens to a lot of country, and I love how the country drummers are really good at that. Country's a very sort of melodic sort of genre, and there's no big sort of drum solos and stuff. It's just it's a rhythm that just follows that beautiful sort of harmony and melody all the way through. I'm just always attracted to that.
Did you ever have a period of your life where you were too busy to play?
Yeah, and it still pains me to
most
think about
of your
it.
life.
No, actually, not really. I mean, there was a gap in primary school where I stopped playing, and I regret that because that's a really critical part for your development. And I really wish that in primary school and secondary school I was playing in bands a lot, and I think that really affected me. But then at uni was some of the best days of my life. We were in a band then, and we did okay, but it was just a fabulous experience of rehearsing multiple times a week, playing the gigs on the weekend, and it was just brilliant. I mean, there's the ultimate team sport. If it goes well, you're in it together. If it goes badly, you're in it together. The stories are fantastic. The fights are even better, and you learn a lot about yourself, and you learn a lot about dealing with other people, and you learn about playing music and even and playing to a crowd. And it's just, I mean, those 6 years of going through med school and playing my band, I look back on those very, very fondly.
That's unreal. So nowadays, does your schedule allow you... Do you have the kind of schedule where you have to have multiple days off in a row to kind of recharge the batteries, or do you say schedule or schedule? It's such good.
I say schedule, but I hear everybody says schedule, and I like... Is schedule the right thing to say, or is it schedule?
Yeah.
I'm glad you.
I know. I have to think about it every time, and I second guess myself. Does your schedule allow you to play drums more now, say, than when you were first starting out?
Yeah, definitely. When I finished med school and got on the neurosurgery training program, I did a national tour, so I was in a different city each year. So taking a drum kit was just not viable. So I had to sell it in the first year, and that really hurt. And for the entire 6 years of training, it was all about, I'm going to buy a drum kit when I'm done. I want to get back into it straight away. And then when I moved to Brisbane, I was working in private and public, and that was very time-consuming. And I made a decision, Michael. I actually made a decision. I said, right, I'm going to take some time back for myself. I'm going to claim back my mornings. And I retired from the public sector and just worked in private, purely so that I could have the mornings back to myself to do something for me. It was a tough decision because nothing's ever perfectly good or perfectly bad. Each decision you make, it's got a good part to it and a bad part to it. Yeah. And the public sector's got a lot of positive stuff, but the negative was that it took up all my time, and the after hours on call and the nighttime on call. That was the price I paid. So I got my mornings back, got my drum kit back, started playing. And we were even about to record something when COVID hit, and now I've had 3 years of, again, nothing. And my heart is bleeding.
Yeah. So when are you getting back into it?
That's a great question. I think if you ask me tomorrow. If you ask my partner, it's when you find a garage that's soundproofed. I even had an electric kit, a really nice electric kit, but even it's going through the headphones. It sounds amazing, but even the sound of the stick on a pad.
It's loud.
It's still loud, yeah. The next door neighbours are still have the same. I might as well be playing, on some big old, broadcaster booming and stuff. To them, it's the same thing. Same amount of
Have you ever tried the ones with the mesh heads?
That's what I had, a Roland.
Oh, and they were still loud.
Yeah. Well, I didn't think it was loud, but the neighbours thought it was loud because there's just that relentless tap 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 tap. Just drive them crazy. They don't understand, Michael, do they? They just don't get it. Like they can't. No, they can't hear what's going. It sounds well class in my headphones.
Yeah, yeah, I know that feeling. I had a neighbour at my old studio in Annandale that I had to move out of, sadly, at the beginning of last year. And the guy above had a kitchen renovation business, and he was the most horrible human being I've ever encountered in my life. And he complained about music, and I did everything in my power to not bother him. And he said to me, there's not going to be a fucking recording studio downstairs, mate. And I said, well, there is. I'm doing everything in my power to, minimize the impact on you. And I said, what if you got like a blacksmith or something who was banging, or someone using pneumatic drills or something? And he said these exact words to me. He said, mate, drills are fine. It's just music, mate. It makes you want to rip your own face off.
Mate, you're never going to win against that.
That is exactly what the guy said. So there's something actually about the constant beat of music that can actually drive people a bit more crazy than random kind of obnoxious sounds.
Yeah, I wonder if it's because music is it's very personal. You listen to something, it's really about you doing something for yourself, and it means something to you. So there's some vulnerability to it. So when you hear somebody else playing music, it's possible that, it's a bit like, someone on the road who's not really thoughtful on the road. They're just thinking about themselves, and you become enraged because you see someone else who's sort of oblivious or doing something for themselves. And perhaps when somebody else is playing music loud, you feel like, well, that should be about them, but they shouldn't be putting it on everybody else. Music's a personal thing, and I feel like it's very related to road rage in a way.
Yeah, indeed. It certainly reminded me of it with this neighbour I had, let me tell you. Is you were talking about getting your mornings back. Is burnout a real problem for surgeons?
Yeah, it's definitely a problem. Burnout is a big problem.
How many people get into surgery only to just go, spend? Because I think from what I've read and listened to podcasts of you before, it was 16 years of training. How many people would go through that kind of amount of training and then get to the other end and go, actually, nah, this isn't for me, and quit?
Oh, do you know what? There is a few people that go through 16 years and then at the very end of the final post say, yep, I've had enough. There's only a handful, though. And that's, I think, the trap for most of them, because they get to that point and they've spent so much time doing something that they know they can't do anything else. So their skills are all about really one thing. None of these people can do anything else. And you think, in your heart of your hearts, I've spent all this time pursuing one goal. It'd be stupid to give up now. Like 16 years, and now I'm going to go and be a florist or go and pursue some music career or something. It's very hard to justify that. So there's a lot of surgeons who go through that, who have a low level of satisfaction in their work, but they know that they're not going to pivot. Like it's far too expensive to pivot, and so,
which is kind of sad.
Yeah, it is. It is. The problem is, like, we don't know what surgery looks like until we get out the other end. That's part of it. Like, and you don't know if you're good at it until you get out the other end. It's very different from musical sport. Like, if Cristiano Ronaldo could kick a football right from the get-go. So, whereas Dr. X, who wants to be a neurosurgeon, how do they know they're going to have the aptitude for neurosurgery until they go through the rigors of getting into the program and testing themselves out? You weren't
cutting people's skulls off as a kid for practice.
No, or animals or nothing like that. I just knew that
we can rule out psychopath, can we?
Well, yes, for that, but I still might be a psychopath in other areas. But that's a real problem. I mean, the burnout is a big issue. The burnout's a different issue. The burnout is from the golden handcuffs. So surgeons are very good at borrowing from their future self 3, 4, 5 times over. Like, they just do it.
Right.
It's just part of the personality. So once they've done that, they've then got to work and work and work and work to pay that all off, right?
Yeah.
That's a great example of a guy at work. He's got a countdown. He's literally in a book. It's a physical book, and he's got numbers and it's a countdown. And we're like, well, what's this for? And he goes, that's how many operations I need to do to pay off my house.
Wow.
But why didn't you buy a smaller house?
Are we talking like hundreds of operations?
Yeah, probably.
Wow.
Mate, we're good at spending money. It's a real problem.
Well, I mean, I would vouch to say that luckily enough, you probably have a reasonable hourly rate. So it probably makes spending money a little easier for you than someone like me.
I'd like to concentrate on the satisfaction, contentment, what an alternative metric would be. Like, I know some very wealthy people, and I know enough wealthy people to know that metric alone means nothing.
Yeah, totally.
So
it does mean you can spend more, is my point.
Yes, but that in itself doesn't really mean anything at all.
No.
I mean, but put this for example, right? You got to play in a version with Denzel, right? And you were having the time of your life. There are not many times in my life where I wouldn't give a left arm to be in that situation.
Yeah.
That's a life experience. That would have just been, that is fabulous.
Yeah.
I would have to be extremely wealthy to feel like I'd compensated for not being able to do that.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. Well, I suppose that's why I said before that it's a bit sad that, people feel like they've invested too much time to kind of pivot, because I know musicians that have spent 10 years, 20 years on their craft that get to a point where they go, you know what, this is all too hard. And then they'll just change careers. And
that's
I think,
interesting.
Even though it makes me sad that the music industry does chew people up and spit them out, I think there's a real beauty to people who acknowledge that they're not happy and just say, no, I'm going to walk away and try and find something that makes me happy.
Wow. That's a real eye-opener for me. That's a real eye-opener.
So is your assumption that anyone that's making money professionally from music is just got it made? Is that the eye-opening part of it?
Yes. I think I had a sort of a romanticized view of that. Is it because what they're good at and what they enjoy, so the creative side of it meets the commerce side of it, and the two of them don't go well together? Or do they just want to make a living and be comfortable?
Look, as with every other facet of life, everyone's different. I'm very, very lucky that money isn't what motivates me. And so, therefore, if I don't have a lot of money, I'm still as happy as a pig in shit, because I get to make music, and that's a real joy. For others, they want financial security, and that's completely fair enough. But the other aspect to it is when you pour your heart and soul into writing music and producing it, and you spend hundreds of hours making a record, and you're super proud of it, and then you go to share it with your friends, and you get very little back, and you feel like you've created something that was special, and it's met with general indifference from the universe. That's a real crushing weight for me and for many musicians. So I think it's not just about the art and commerce not gelling. It's also the vulnerability from releasing your art and not having your expectations met as well.
Yeah, right. So it's really... is it like a broken heart where you make yourself vulnerable then you are cast aside, or you remain unloved or something?
Yeah.
Well, okay.
I'd never equated it to a broken heart, but I think that's a really, really interesting way of looking at it. A lot of musos will complain about their lot in life, and a lot will just constantly be amazed by how lucky they are. But it's a tough road. It's a roller coaster ride. And for every, being in the Triple J studios with Denzel Curry doing that amazing like a version, there are 1,000 for every one of those times where I go, man, I put so much into this and I feel like no one cares. So it's it's an emotional roller coaster. Yeah.
That's a real eye-opener. So the question I want to know is, why do you do it in the first place? Is it you must have loved it in the first place?
Same reason you play drums.
Yeah.
I can only answer really personally, but I became so obsessed with Elton John when I was about 16, 17. And that was the catalyst for me. I discovered Elton John and I went, I want to do that. And I just didn't stop. I didn't have any piano lessons. I taught myself to play Elton John music. And it was an imperative. Probably in the same way that from the age of 4, you were tapping beats. And I think people do it because it's an incredible passion. And it's incredibly beautiful, as you know, to make music and to make music with other people where the sum of the parts is greater than the whole.
That is so
true. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That is a very unique feeling in a band room, isn't it? When you just transcend to a different level and it's like the power is coming from somewhere else and the communication is innate. And
absolutely. We joked last night that this might be a 24-hour podcast. I have so many questions. Here am I drumming on the table. Okay. God, where do I start? What happens to you when you play the drums on an emotional and a brain level?
I think
personally,
what happens to me when I play the drums on both those levels, there is definitely two. One is I love the motor side of it, so the coordination side of it. So I used to love practicing, having an ostinato on one side and then practicing something on the other side of my body. That for me was just fascinating and it was just brilliant. A classic example was Virgil Donati, where he plays a paradiddle with his left hand and left foot, just playing a paradiddle, and then he plays a double paradiddle with his right. So he's got 4 against 6. And I spent months trying to learn that, and I got it, but and then he swaps it around, which I haven't been able to get that. But that motor thing for me was just fabulous. The coordination and the control was just real fascinating science. But then there's the other side of the personal side, where it's deeply rooted in that childhood romanticism that I had. Watching that guy play the drums, and there's just some sort of brain chemistry where it's like a first love. It's like you just never let it go. It's just always there, and so it always feels like home. And it was reinforced throughout my whole life. Whenever something was tough or something bad had happened, I would jump on my drum kit, because the drum kit never made me feel bad. It always felt like the harbour during the war type thing. And then a lot of the times I would play, I would have a melody going through my head. So I'd be playing and I'd have some sort of, soaring chorus melody going through my head, and it would just take me to another world, It's just.
Do you get a real emotional response when you play, ever?
It just feels good. Do I get an emotional response? I guess I do. It's it just feels right. Do you know what I mean? It just like walking on a drum kit on a stage and sitting down just feels right. That feels like the way the world should be.
Yeah, nice. What's the biggest crowd you've ever played to?
2,000. But there is a caveat to that. So I was 12 and there was a band playing in Hobart at the Hobart City Hall. and it was full. It was about, I think it's about 2,000, 1,800 people. And somehow my dad convinced the drummer to let me jump on the drum kit and play. Like, that would never happen today. And I can't remember who the band was. But I knew their song. I knew one of their songs, and Dad and I had played it. And somehow I convinced, and the drummer said yes. So this place was full, and at 12 I jumped on this drum kit. And they counted, and off we go, and I'm playing this song. And then I get halfway through the song, and I realise they're actually playing a different song. But luckily what I was playing worked anyway. And then the next song was the one that we thought we were going to be playing. So I got to play 2 songs. And I wasn't nervous. It just felt right. It just felt... And I didn't even think about the crowd. It was just about that sort of, that sort of mystical, magical feeling. I probably wasn't listening to anybody. I think I was listening to the keyboard, and that was it. That was my only reference to what we were actually doing.
Yeah, because that's what you were used to with playing with your dad, just focusing on the piano.
Correct. Yeah. I don't even know what the bass part was. I don't even know who else was on the stage. But even, I mean, that's fun. But even the smaller crowds, I mean, they're fabulous as well. Like you do the gig at the pub, and you have 50 people at the pub. They're almost... Yeah. Comedians say that. I mean, I've heard Dave Chappelle say that. He says he prefers the small club where it's personal, it's interactive, and people are yelling at you, and you're there with the crowd. And I've never played anything bigger than I've just described, but I can imagine, the stadium. There's that disconnect where it's almost sort of like it's one-way traffic in a way. Yeah. Particularly with the lights, I'd imagine they don't see, a crowd of 3, 5, 10, 50,000 or whatever. But so I can't compare.
Well, you watch like Queen at Live Aid, for example, and it's the difference between playing to a bunch of individuals and playing to an organism, like one giant organism. It must be
extraordinary
playing to that kind of crowd.
Yeah, and especially
That's strange.
Yeah. I can't even imagine. I mean, I dream about it. And when the organism is one, I think organism's a great way to describe it. I mean, the psychology of the mob is fantastic. How you turn, 20,000 individuals into just one, and they are all just beating as one. I mean, that's what Queen did in Live Aid, didn't it? I mean, that crowd just became one. I mean, that's why it's gone down as legendary.
Are there any other organisms on the planet that are quite as extraordinary at that as humans?
Well, you see the animals that, like a school of fish, they do those amazing patterns, don't they, where they just, they seem to behave as one. There's a school of fish and then a shark comes in and they swirl around it. And it's just like they're somehow communicating with some extraordinary, mechanism that we can't understand. So...
But is that more because humans also have this we have this ability to get along with each other in really large groups of people. I remember hearing an anthropologist say that humans are amazing because we can get together in groups of 10 million people in a city and basically all follow the rules to not kill each other and not just be stealing everything all the time. What do you think of humans?
I love them. But I think with what you're saying there, that you get 10 million people in a city and they sort of follow the rules. There's law and order and they get together as a society. There is definitely a part of that is down to the individual. The individual is acting in their best interest. Like, it is in their best interest to not kill someone, to not steal something. They could do it, but then they've got to face the institution that is, the police or whatever. So everyone's getting along because it's all in their interests to get along, right? But there's something more magical about music in that it transcends all individuality. It transcends all culture, transcends all language, and people genuinely do beat as one. It doesn't matter if the guys from Mexico or girls from from the UK, whatever language we speak. If it's a band we all three of us love, there is just that innate understanding there, and all differences disappear as well. Like there's There's just peace and harmony, and everyone's just as one. It's a really powerful thing. I actually don't think it happens anywhere else.
And to that extent, we kind of do become like the school of fish, where it's just all happening completely in an involuntary fashion.
Yeah. Until you get that one drunk guy that just decides to pull
yeah,
away from the crowd.
That's why I'm trying to extricate myself from covers gigs.
Wonderwall!
Yeah. Which is fine. I don't mind someone yelling Wonderwall at me, so long as I start, because, people will say, play Wonderwall. So I start playing Wonderwall, and they go, woo! And then I'll look at someone in the crowd, and they're going, boo! I'm like, fuck you! I'm trying to... Anyway, I'm getting too old and grumpy to deal with drunk dickheads in a pub, my friend. I'm very interested in the flow state and or being in the zone, either musically or in sport. What happens to the and I call it kind of switching the brain off. You put in the practice so that you can enter that flow state or get in the zone where the brain is switched off. From a neurological point of view, what's happening in those moments in the brain?
That's a great question. What's happening in the brain during the flow state? It happens in surgery too, by the way. It's not just music or sport. For example, when I'm in the flow state operating, some very bizarre things happen. One of them is my eyes sting and they water, which is an autonomic response. And I've heard Virat Kohli, the Indian cricketing superstar, talk about when he's in the flow state, his eyes sting and they water. So I'm taking that. That's a sign. That's a real phenomena. But absolutely. So it's just something bizarre. It's well described in the neuroscience literature. It's got something to do with attention. Like we have perception, which is the whole world around us. And then we have this incredible ability called attention, where we can just focus on something. And the classic thing is talking to someone in a crowded room. So it's called the cocktail effect, or cocktail party effect, I think it's called. So there's lots of conversations going on, and then you're having a conversation with somebody in front of you, and you can zero in on that conversation and not hear anything else or be distracted by anything else that's going on. And that is a well appreciated but poorly understood function of the brain. It's a phenomenal function of the brain, and so we get it. So when I'm operating, that's what happens. Everybody around me disappears. The theatre disappears. My entire morning disappears. And the other thing that happens is that the connection to my hands becomes sort of like some sort of phenomenal state. It doesn't feel like a physical connection. I think about the movement and the movement happens. I don't actually try and make it. I just think about doing that, and I think, and my hands are just following my thoughts. And the other thing is the time distortion. So time just disappears. So when I'm in the flow state, an hour can feel like 5 minutes.
How long do operations get when you're operating on someone's brain?
Well, it's variable, but I have done 18 hours, but that's rare, thank God. A typical one would be a couple of hours.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, 2 or 3 hours.
That's surprisingly short to someone that doesn't know anything about brain surgery.
Well, a lot of it's not that. There's some surgery that used to be done that was really difficult, skull-based surgeries, down on the skull base. It's where all the cranial nerves are, all the blood vessels are. It's just tiger territory. And, 20 years ago, they used to operate on this part of the brain to remove brain tumours. And then we got something called stereotactic radiosurgery, where we can zap these tumours. So no actual operation. Right. You just get very focused and well-engineered radiotherapy. And that really sort of took away a lot of that complex skull-based stuff. So, but a lot of the stuff on the top is, it's fairly accessible, and what's been trying to be achieved is well-defined, and, a couple of hours.
That's amazing.
But
that's amazing.
That flow state is phenomenal. I mean, yes, had it in we talked about with the band when everybody's just on a different level. That's a flow state, but it's got something to do with attention. I was reading this book by Ian McGilchrist, who is a philosopher and psychiatrist, and he has spent 20 years writing one book. 20 years, let me repeat that.
Wow.
20 years, and he has really condensed the research on the right and left side of the brain. So this is really the last word. And it's a fabulous book. It's called The Master and His Emissary. And a lot of the study comes from birds. So birds have got this interesting thing where their eyes are obviously on the side of their head. And they use their right hemisphere to see the whole world. So that's really like an appreciation of everything. So it's looking out for mates and predators and taking the whole world in its context. And they use their left hemisphere to focus on individual things. So they use the feeding example. So it's feeding, trying to pick out a bit of grain from the grit on the ground. So it needs to be able to work out what's grain and what's grit, and really focusing on the inanimate and the particulate and it's the detail. Whereas the right hemisphere is more interested in the world in general and sort of the living world and how everything relates to it and all that sort of stuff. So I suspect that flow state is potentially a left dominant or left hemisphere dominant function where the focus just becomes so narrow that the otherworldly appreciation disappears. Oh, I mean, don't really
Is it actually basically cut the brain in half vertically and it's right and left, or is that just an easy way of putting it for the layperson?
The brain is physically split. Like if you look at it, it's called the longitudinal fissure, and it runs from front to back all the way through, and it goes right down to the middle of the brain. So it's probably, I have to measure it. It's good 7 centimeters from top down to where the bottom of the split finishes, but there's two physical halves to it, and there's all these theories as to why the brain is split. I think the theory is that if you have a big mass like jelly, and it's just one big mass, if you thrash your head, that's quite a big mass to flop around and get injured. But if you were to divide it in half, suddenly you've got two smaller masses. So the momentum of each is significantly reduced. And I think the chances of injuring that brain are significantly reduced. And then there's another split called the Sylvian fissure, which splits either the right and the left into sort of half again. So I feel like that also further reduces the mass of the brain. So as you're moving around and thrashing or whatever, the likelihood of a torsional injury or a back forward sort of whiplash injury is avoided. And the other interesting thing is the brain floats in water. So it actually is buoyant. And the brain weighs about 1.4 kilograms, on a set of scales, but it's in warm seawater and it has the equivalent weight of about 50 grams. So it's got this incredible water cushion around it.
Wow.
And so that's basically like throwing a bowling ball at a wall versus a tennis ball. Like it's a very powerful effect. But yeah, back to the split brain. I think Ian McGilchrist was looking at why the brain was split, but I think there's a mechanical part to it, literally, that reduces the momentum either side, reduces injury, add the water cushion into it as well, reduces likelihood injury to the brain. But yeah, it's definitely split. And an operation going down that split, man, that's like nothing else. That's like descending in some sort of terrifying underwater cave and just going down and down and down and down into the depths and like where am I going to finish? And everything under the microscope is terrifying.
So you're cutting into that the split between the two hemispheres.
Well, it's the split's already there, so the space is already there. So literally just going down through that space, there's all this connective tissue that's got to be divided to release and open up that space, but the split is already there. But it's a really cool thing to just descend millimeter by millimeter down this natural crevice.
Wow.
And you see these blood vessels under the microscope. The blood vessels are the coolest thing because a blood vessel, it thumps to the heartbeat, and on the anaesthetic machine, it's just a beat, right? It's like child's play. But under a microscope, an artery is doof, doof, doof. It's like,
wow, like a kick drum.
Yes, don't touch that.
Don't touch the kick drum. Do you feel like an explorer? I mean, the way you described that, I feel like you're exploring space or something. Feels like it.
First time going down it, it feels more like I'm terrified of water, so I use an underwater analogy, like going into some sort of cave. There's scuba divers going to caves.
Yeah.
What the hell was with that? That's my nightmare. Like, some terrifying sort of three-eyed octopus or, some sort of, dagger-carrying shark. Why would you do that?
I love the fact that these people are in very dangerous situations in underwater caves, and you're afraid that there might be a shark carrying a dagger. I think there's more rational things to be afraid of, or
that's
a three-eyed
fear, mate.
octopus.
It's not rational. It's just,
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Am I an explorer?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say. I don't know. I like to explore things. Absolutely. They call me the agitator. That's my unfortunate nickname because I'm always agitating. Like the water is never calm when I'm around. It's always got ripples because I'm always asking questions or wanting to find out about this or look at that or find out about this.
All of those are good things, though, right?
Yes and no. I had to strike a balance. Like at med school, someone would say, we're going to talk about the sodium potassium ATPase, which is a channel in the membrane. And I would I refuse to accept this fact because I want to see evidence for it. Show me that you've actually physically looked at this sodium potassium ATPase. I want to know where the evidence is. How do you know it even exists?
Right.
And so I would then go digging through the literature and find, so where has someone actually looked at this thing? Is this a fact? Do we know this for sure? Genetics was a nightmare.
Had they?
Sort of.
Right.
I believe them now. I've seen what they've done, and I'm like, okay, so we sort of looked at it, but so I'm always exploring the truth. I think is what the bottom line is. I don't want to accept just anything. I think I'm always exploring and looking for the truth in anything. So
I can't see anything but positive to that. Do you? Speaking of exploring the truth, one of the things that I've been fascinating when I've been really fascinated to have this conversation, and so many questions have come up. How do you get spiritual? Does this raise spiritual questions, or does it put them to rest? The more you learn about the brain.
Do I get spiritual? I can answer this question. I can answer this question. I'll tell you a very quick story, okay, which will answer your question. This sums up pretty much what you're looking for. So when I started neurosurgery, for me, it was all about structure, anatomy, right? That was just a physical brain. It was beautiful. And it was all about the microsurgery, which is really a sport in itself. You know, I watched this guy who was like a robot. He's like painting one of those car painting robots. He's literally, his hands are just beautiful. It's like, no, it's just fabulous. So the science of surgery, and then it was all about the physical stuff. That's what I absolutely loved. And then 3 years ago, I was doing an operation, and I was a consultant. I was second year out as fully qualified, and it was something called an awake craniotomy. So the brain is exposed during an operation, but the patient under the drape is awake and talking. And that's necessary for a number of reasons, which I won't go into, but that's the situation. And I had this epiphany. So I looked at the brain, which I looked at 1,000 times, and then I looked under the drape, and I looked at the patient, and I saw the patient looking back at me. And the thing about that was that patient was having an experience. They were experiencing the world. They were conscious, right? And then I go back to looking at the brain, and then I go back to looking at the patient having experience, and then suddenly it dawned on me. Well, I wouldn't say dawn, it whacked me in the back of the head. The mind-body problem. Like it was just a bolt of lightning out of the blue. There was the physical brain, and there was this phenomena of consciousness, and I had the unique situation of seeing the actual brain that was doing that experience. Like it was the same brain. And I could suddenly understand the problem of that physical thing, which is just a bunch of cells conducting electricity, creating this phenomena of consciousness, something that nobody in the history of mankind has been able to solve. And more interesting, so there was the gap between the physical and, whatever consciousness is, the mind-body problem. And the other thing, there's just no hint on that brain as to how it was pulling off that trick. Like there was no sparkles on the surface of the brain when the patient was saying, hello, how's it going? Parts of the brain didn't glow green. There was no distortion in the atmosphere. Like God didn't boom down from the heavens or anything like that. It was just nothing. Just white brain, poof, pulsating with a heartbeat, and there's consciousness. I was like, how the hell does a physical thing create that? And it was just astonishing for me to see it all in one go. Like, obviously you can see a brain in a bottle and look at someone being conscious, but to see the brain creating it at the same time, I got to appreciate that mind-body problem. And so it's not spiritual, but it's become an absolute fascination in, it's not really, I don't know if it's really philosophical, but there is some magic happening there, and I appreciate that. And my focus has moved beyond just the structure and the anatomy and the science of operating to more this sort of, philosophical dilemma that is the mind-body problem, because I've had that first-hand experience and a real epiphany during surgery of what the nature of that problem is. And it's a phenomenal trick. Like, it is pulling off a phenomenal trick. And we're having it now. I mean, in your head, it's pitch black and it's deathly quiet, and there's no color, there's no sound, there's no nothing. It's just black and quiet. Yet you're having this, all the senses are meaning something to and feeling like something to you.
Yeah.
And we don't know how that tissue and those cells and electricity is creating that. So it's not spiritual, but it is philosophical, I guess, which is unusual for me, because I'm very much, I'm a drummer, mate, so I don't think too deeply about stuff.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, I wouldn't say spiritual. My dad was
Is it a case of the more you know, the more you don't know? So the more you learn about the brain, does that answer more questions than it raises, or is it the other way around?
It's definitely the other way around.
Or is that a stupid question?
No, that's not a stupid question at all. It's a great question, but the answer is, the more you know, the less you know. Absolutely. So things that are stated as fact when you're learning, this part of the brain does this part of the brain does that. And then the more you start to know about that, you realise, well, actually, that's just a complete oversimplification. It's incredibly more complex, more nuanced, It's hard to summarise in a sentence. It's hard to summarise it in an essay, what the subtle differences are and the subtlety of the whole thing. So, Ian McGilchrist's book, The Master and His Emissary, is a perfect example of that. It's taken him 20 years in this thick book to just try and nail down the nuances of the understanding of the function of the human brain. And it raises even more questions than it gives answers. So,
is that daunting?
No, it's just it's fascinating, because if you'd asked Caesar to explain DNA, he'd be like, DNA, what are you talking about? Well, the stuff, the stuff that's used for inheritance. Well, I don't know what you're talking about. Fast forward a few thousand years, people can tell you what DNA is, and the only difference is the technology. So I feel at some point this incredible mystery will be solved. It'll probably just come down to technology. But the world's more interesting when we don't understand it.
I think there's great beauty in the kind of thinking that we really don't know shit.
But that's the great thing about it. We play music to try and understand stuff better, express ourselves better, because we don't know how to express it, or we don't know what's going to happen when we go and do something. The world would be a very boring place if we had the answers for everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How much? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that's really pretty much just a tax accountant, isn't it? They know everything. They've got tax income in. Yeah. Like they can tell you the answers to everything in their world. Yeah. That's why it's not a very interesting world.
Yeah. So the less we know about something, the more fascinating it is.
I never went to an Oasis concert, and I really wish that I had the chance to. But a lot of people said that a big part of the attraction was they just didn't know what was going to happen. Like, what was Liam going to actually do? Like, there's this big unknown. There's this loose cannon who could do anything. But I think that's generalisable. I think, when there's that unknown, that's where the spice of life is. So it's fabulous we don't understand the brain. It's really interesting to try and, guesstimate what bits do and theorise about it and philosophise about it and look at it and it must be like you on a guitar, you jump on a guitar, you don't really know what you're going to play. You don't like playing covers, that's boring, right? Because you know what you're going to play, but improvisation, you don't know what's going to happen. That's the bit. Yeah.
Improvisation is just a magic thing, and it begs the question: where does creativity come from? How would you answer that? Where does creativity come from? Where do bursts of inspiration come from?
Well, they used to say that the right hemisphere was the creative side of the brain, right? And the left was the logical one. And that came from what they called split brain research, where people were having epilepsy. And so they split the connection between the two parts of the brain. So electrical storm on one side couldn't spread to the other side and cause a generalized seizure. And that gave them a window to study the brain in two halves separately, because this right was literally disconnected from the left. So they could do these tests and see what the right does separately to the left. And it was a unique opportunity to study them separately. And the latest, and again, this comes back to the master in his emissary, the latest would say that creativity is done on both sides of the brain. The right and the left are equally important. It's just, so it's not a matter of what it does, like what does the right do and what does the left do, because they both do both. It's more of a question of the manner in which they do it.
Right.
So the right hemisphere, as I said, is more about the broader view of the world and your interaction and your embodiment within the world itself. Now you can see how that's important for a creative process. And then the left hemisphere is really about narrowing down and probably that really focused attention and possibly even that flow state. And you can see how that's really, really important for creativity as well. So that's what I find interesting. Rather than saying, oh, this is the part of the brain, this little part here, that's your creativity spot. That doesn't exist. But and that would be boring to talk about. But it's much more interesting to say it's like the perfect complementary partners. You've got one of the partners is really good at this and does that, and the other is really, really good at this and does that, and then they become greater than the sum of their parts. So the right side of the brain is very good at taking the living world and sort of everything in context and and relationships and all that sort of stuff. And the left side of the brain is really good at zeroing in on focusing on something particular and sort of taking the context taking it out of context and just looking at it as sort of just a particular of information or whatever. And you can see how together those two, would be important for improvisation. So
absolutely.
I think that's the contemporary modern way of thinking about creativity.
So how does neuroplasticity come into that? So like probably many people, my only real knowledge of any of this stuff is I read The Brain That Changes Itself. And for those of us that are listening that don't know that's basically saying that if you lose the part of your brain that moves this finger, the brain can learn to remap that so that this finger can move again. How does that all tie into the left and right hemisphere creative kind of side of things?
Well, neuroplasticity is a real phenomenon. There's no question about that. But it's only to a certain degree. So, I mean, there's really two. There's one where you're recovering from injury, right? So someone has a stroke and they can't move something, and then they start to get some recovery. And then there's the other where there's learning. So if you're learning to play Wonderwall, you get better and better and better at it. That's also a form of neuroplasticity. And so this is, and they used to talk about, is it growing new neurons? Is it growing new connections? Well, a modern theory would suggest it's about the synapse, or where the two brain cells communicate. There's something going on in the synapse that is really important for learning and function. It's not necessarily about the cell itself and the electrical current going across the cell. It's the magic that's happening in the synapse. But neuroplasticity is very interesting. We know that it's better when you're young. So young people learn stuff very, very easily. Like my niece is trilingual. And she's not had to learn that. She just picks it up from listening to her parents speak at home, and they absorb it like a sponge. And the same with learning stuff. But people who have a stroke, so if they have a stroke that infects their arm, they don't get all of that back. They may get some of it back.
Yeah.
So it's certainly it's limited in terms of recovering from injury, and it's hard to learn as we get older. But the neuroplasticity and learning as a kid is quite phenomenal. And I wonder if when it comes to creativity that you learn something and that gives you a platform to go to the next level of the video game, and you're able to explore the world with more tools, and that opens up your creativity. Like is each bit of learning like a tool or a weapon where you get to sort of conquer each level, and therefore you get to explore more. They looked at creativity in savants, people who, or talented autistic people. And there's theories about why they're able to do what they're able to do.
Yeah. What are those theories? Because that's quite extraordinary stuff.
Well, they call it top down or bottom up. So top down is the thinking. Again, this is sort of symbolic, but the top down is your thinking brain. You think about what you're doing, and then the bottom up is all the sensory information. So the auditory, the visual, everything, the feeling, and that's a very slow process. All this sensory information. The top down information thing is all about pattern recognition. So the more developed that is, the quicker you can recognise something. I pick up, that's a cup.
Right.
Or you see something, that's a bird, it's instant pattern recognition. And they say that a lot of the brain's functions about a balance between recognition and surprise, or prediction and surprise. Predict, correct, predict, correct, predict, surprise, what was that? Now I learnt about that, now I can predict and I'm correct, predict and I'm correct. So they're saying with savants that they have a disruption in the top-down part, so their predictive model is defective, which frees them up to reinterpret the sensory information that's coming up to their brain. And so they've got more wriggle room to interpret that in different ways. And, one definition of creativity is really it's originality. It's seeing something from a different point of view. And so hence this top-down, bottom-up thing that perhaps with these savants where they've got disrupted top-down thinking, that they're not limited by sort of our standard pattern recognition pathways. They're sort of they've got this. They're allowed to sort of think about it in a more organic way without sort of being boxed in by this is a bird, or this is this, or this is this. They go, this is. I think this might express it like this, and the rest of us go, my God, that is brilliant. How did you come up with that?
Yeah. Have there been extensive kind of neurological tests done on savants as to what's happening and what's firing at those moments?
Yes, it's so the best tool is functional MRI, fMRI, but it's rubbish. I even did a research project using functional MRI scan. It's rubbish. It's hopeless.
So the best way is just to chop someone's skull off and have a look at what's going on?
Well, we need a better scan. An fMRI scan is it just shows blood flow. So it doesn't even tell you what part of the brain's active. It just tells you where the blood's flowing to the brain. And it's very, very rough. It covers big portions of the brain. And also where you calibrate it. It can be really sensitive or low sensitivity depending on which parts of the brain will light up. So there's a lot of downsides. So, but once they're in the fMRI scanner, you can't recreate creativity. Like they've tried it. I've seen them do it. They get a beatboxer in the MRI scan and they get them just to improv in the MR scanner. But is that real creativity? I mean, what you really want to know is what Einstein's brain looked like when he had his greatest thought, or what Jackson Pollock's brain looked like when he was doing convergence, or what did Keith Richards' brain activity look like when he woke up in the middle of the night with satisfaction? That's creativity. That's the brain patterns I want to know. Keith Richards' brain, probably no brain activity because he's probably stoned, drunk, or both.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's very hard to test it, and it's very hard to recreate creativity in the scientific setting.
So, are you saying that just simply because they created monumental art, or in Einstein's case, he's creating something that completely changed our understanding of the natural world, that would be a different thing to, say, someone who's freestyling? Because let's say you get a beatboxer or a freestyler who's creating something off the top of their head. Is there a different thing happening in the brain to someone who's really done something mind-blowingly extraordinary, or is that the conjecture and you're saying that's why I'd love to see what was happening at that moment?
Correct. Yeah, so no great work of art was ever done in an MRI scanner. It just wasn't. So in the beatboxer, for example, they did the scan, and the thing that blew up, that shone the most, was his cerebellum, which is, is well recognised as a motor centre of the brain. It's where coordination is really, really important. So,
right.
So both sides of the cerebellum were bright red on the scan. What does that say? Well, is it because he was having to move his mouth really, really fast? Is it because he was extracting random words from the universe and putting them together in a really creative way? Is that what that means? Who knows what that means? Nobody knows what that means.
Now, you have physically had someone's skull like completely off, is that right? And secondly, while they're playing a musical instrument.
That's the classic, isn't it? Everybody's seen that. The person playing the violin or the guitar. It's like the money shot.
I know. And look, how can I not talk about the money shot? Particularly when it's a podcast about music and creativity. The first time you experienced that, what was that like?
Well, I have to say I've not had a patient play guitar in theatre, but it's the same thing I was saying before. It's the awake craniotomy. The patient's awake during an operation.
Yeah.
So for mine, it was actually about speech. They were speaking during the operation, then I would stimulate it and then see which part of the brain is the speech part, and then obviously stay away from that. But for the guitar,
how do you stimulate it?
Oh, it's a little bipolar probe which transmits a little current, and when that lands, so you put it on the brain and just stimulate, then you take it off and go to the next bit and stimulate. When it lands on the speech area, the patient will stop talking.
Wow.
So you think it'd be the opposite, like you're stimulating the speech, they'd start speaking like, Shakespearean or swearing or speaking French or something like really cool would happen. But nothing cool happens. It just goes, they just stop talking.
Wow.
But that's what you're looking for. So with the guitar, that is actually not the guitar playing part of the brain. It's actually just the hand part of the brain. So it's the motor strip. So if they'll play, Stairway to Heaven in A minor, and then when you hit the hand part of the brain, it'll become Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in A fucked, basically.
Wow.
So they go, and just nothing, like the guitar will just stop because the motor pathway's been interrupted. So, the whole violin and guitar thing, unfortunately, that's not the brilliant guitar playing part of the brain. I can't tell you which part that is.
That's quite okay.
Just the motor strip.
So you've got someone talking to you, completely conscious, and their skull's off. Do you? Is it literally like go around the skull and pop it off like a bowl?
Pretty much, yeah. There's a drill. There's a really powerful drill called a craniotome, and it's air powered and just basically goes, and then have to lever it off. There's a watertight seal around the brain. Remember I said the brain's floating in water, so there's a watertight seal around it. That's usually stuck to the bone. You've got to lever that off and strip it off the bone, and the bone literally is a flap. Like I've got one here.
Right.
Oh, that is a real skull. And that is sort of what a piece of the skull will look like when it comes off. And so you take that off, and then there's the watertight seal, and then get a pair of scissors and open up the watertight seal, and then peel that back, and voila, there is.
So is one of your patients walking around with a hat on all the time because you forgot to put their skull back on?
We never forget to put on, but there are operations where we don't put the skull back on, so they actually have to wear one of those rugby helmets. Or skull cups, but that's different because they've had an accident and their brain is swelled really badly from the trauma, and so the skull can't go back on after taking the blood clot out because there's just no room. The brain's expanding out of the skull because there's so much pressure.
Right.
So you leave the skull off and let them recover, and after about 6 weeks, when everything is settled back down again, then they come back to surgery and have the skull put back on.
Do you still get a sense of awe when you're in those moments, or do you become blasé about it?
Yes, blasé about the trauma ones because the trauma one is a phone call at 2:00 in the morning, so there's nothing great about that. That's and it's always the same. It's always young males. It's always the same. It's alcohol and speed, and they get together and it just ruins their brain, and at 2:00 in the morning you're operating on their head. But the awake craniotomy, yes. Like that epiphany that I had, that's a real deal. Like that was a real mind-bending experience of realization about something pretty great.
Is there any danger at that moment that you're having this incredible epiphany that's going to take over and you're somehow going to make a mistake?
Michael, during that particular epiphany, I had to sit down. I actually had to sit down and my assistant continued the operation temporarily. Like literally the universe was standing behind me, and when I had my epiphany, it just went ka-dunk into the back of my head and I was just like rattled. Like it was a big deal. Like that realization, putting the two together, physical brain, conscious experience in the same person at the same time, seeing that was like a big deal for me. So I actually had to sit down. I was a bit rattled.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's wild. That's wild. So when you're talking to someone in that moment, are they freaking out? I mean, you're not having a normal conversation because they're aware of the fact that this is going on. What's that conversation like?
If they're freaked out, you haven't done your job. So they go through a lot before the operation. I talk them through it and say, this is what's going to happen. This is what you're going to expect. And it's really an important part of the process because the last thing you want is an uncooperative patient during an operation. So if they wake up for the awake part of the surgery and their brain is exposed and they start having a panic attack or they go, what the hell's going on? It's a complete disaster. You can't do the testing. The brain will swell. They'll possibly have a seizure. Lots of bad things happen. So it doesn't happen very often, not because there's not enough cases to do it, but because you've got to choose the right patient, someone who's actually going to go, yeah, okay, I agree to wake up during my surgery. If that's what's good for me, I'll do it. And you've got to trust that they understand what they're up for and that they're going to follow the instructions. So they're well prepped.
Do they remember it?
That's a great question. And yes, they do, but not in the sort of detail that I had it. So they remember being awake vaguely and talking. And even interestingly, when they're talking and then I stimulate it and they stop talking, then I take the stimulator off and they start talking again, they don't have much memory of not being able to talk. For them, it was just like a gap that didn't exist. Or they sort of say, I think I missed something. I think I had a little problem. Then it's really not sort of crystal clear as to what was going on when they had that problem.
If you stimulate that part of the brain mid-sentence and they stop and then you remove the stimulation, do they continue the sentence?
Yes. Yeah, the way it's usually done is that someone is holding up little cards. They've got pictures and they just have to say what the picture is, and so they're just going card, or sometimes counting down from 20 or whatever it might be. Usually they just pick up from where they left off with very little recognition that there was a problem 2 seconds ago.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's wild.
That's wild. It is. It's tapping into some, how the brain generates consciousness is like it is a universal problem. Like that's up there with black holes and the Big Bang. It is a mega mystery of the universe. Yeah. And there it is, right in front of me. It's like it's happening. It's like, why can't you just tell me the answer? Give me the answer. Yeah. Like you're right there. Just tell me how you do it.
Yeah, exactly. So the old thing that I've heard my whole life is that we use 10% of our brain. How accurate is that?
Yeah, it's completely bollocks. It's like the right and left, right creative, left logical thing. It gets into pop culture and then it's impossible to get out of pop culture.
Yeah. So is that when you look at a savant, for example, and you measure what's going on there, or we know that they're doing extraordinary things. Is that how it gets into popular culture? That there are people that can do these incredible calculations, and so the rest of us aren't. How does that become a thing?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happens. They see these people that can memorize 10,000 numbers, or can draw these incredible pictures, or whatever they might be able to do, and then people say, well, anybody can do that if they could just release that potential. The potential is in there in all of us, and we just need to be able to find a way to hack our brain and release that ability to do X, Y, and Z. But it's not actually the case, because there's something else going on in their brain. Like I said, they've got a deficit. They're not normal. They've got functions they can't perform, and a lot of that is psychosocial. So that's that top-down information processing.
Yeah.
That is actually default in their brain, which has liberated the upcoming sensory information. So we all have potential to do things, but the 10%'s complete rubbish. I mean, there's an estimate about 5% of what your brain's activity is actually conscious. So you're aware of 5% of your brain's activity, and 95% of the brain's activity is happening below the level of consciousness. That's all in a sub. We can't hack that. We can't get into that. But if you're talking about,
is that measurable? The subconscious.
Yeah, someone has. I need to read that paper, but I was listening to two colleagues talk about it. And it was there was like 95.44% of the brain's activity is subconscious, which is very, very specific. And I don't know how they measured it. I need to look at how they measured it. They're very interesting to find out how they did that, whether it was EEG or hopefully not functional MRI. But yeah.
Oh, I hate those functional MRIs after what
rubbish.
You told me before. Just rubbish machines.
But you talk about potential, Michael. Like, one thing that is interesting about potential, like, can I become a concert pianist? Probably not. Can I hack my brain to become that? Probably not. But drugs are really interesting. Like, I don't condone that or take them, but people take LSD and they have these experiences, which is a very exaggerated sensory experience, right? And they have some quite phenomenal experiences. That is interesting because that doesn't just come from nowhere. That does release neurotransmitters in the brain, which then creates that experience. So that potential is in the brain.
Right.
Like the feeling that people get when they take something, or the visual auras, or the they describe it as like the biggest, warmest hug they've ever had, and the kaleidoscope vision, or whatever it might be. That's it. In a way, it's distorted perception, but that is all potential of the brain that's being unreleased by or being released by drugs. So there is untapped potential there, and a lot of our brain function sort of keeps it all in check. But drugs are interesting because it does unlock stuff. Like people have these incredible experiences. Well, their brain was always able to have that incredible experience. It didn't come from nowhere. It was already there. It's just that the drug was able to unlock that. And whether it unlocks it or whether it just scrambles the signal, who really knows? But
are there lots of tests done on that?
A lot of people who research consciousness come from a background of having lived through the 70s and LSD, psychedelics,
Right.
And because they take it and then that's their epiphany, that's their awake craniotomy. Like my awake craniotomy was their LSD in the 70s, and that's what's prompted a lifetime research into it. So
that's wild. So don't take drugs, kids. But from a neurological perspective, it can be fascinating.
The problem with drugs, Sage, as an aside, the problem is not what it does to you; it's what you do to other people while on it. That's always the problem. People say, "Don't tell me what I can take. I can take whatever I want." Well, that is true. You can absolutely take what you want, but it's while you're under the influence and what influence you exert on other people while you're under the influence. That's the problem.
Yeah. My mum has always had a fascination with the power of the mind to heal the body. How much do you know about that, or you as in the neuroscience community?
I'm going to be very, very respectful here because we're talking about your mum here. But I will say from a surgical... So here's an example from a surgical point of view. So someone has brain cancer. And I know all the literature about brain cancer. I know what the operation looks like. I know what the outcome after surgery is going to be. I know what the outcome from radiotherapy and chemotherapy looks like. Like I know what that looks like. And I also know about the exceptions to the rule, but I know why they're an exception to the rule. And I also know what eventually also happens to them. And then there are people who have the brain cancer who will decide not to have surgery or take adjuvant chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and go down an alternative route of, it could be prayer, herbals, other sort of mind bodies of exercises to try and counter. I mean, Steve Jobs was an example with his pancreatic cancer. He didn't take chemotherapy for quite some time. So I've always struggled with it because I see science knows what the outcome is. Science has got a proven effect on the condition. It's been shown time and time and time again. If we do this surgical technique and we apply this drug and this radiotherapy at this dose, then the outcome is better.
Yeah.
And so it's very narrow-minded, but it's very hard to get away from that, especially when there's no evidence to the contrary. And a small part of me feels that it's not so much a reflection that there is any validity in the alternative, but it's just a reflection of sometimes, desperation. It's I think there's a much bigger psychology at play there when someone has been given some terrible diagnosis or a terminal diagnosis. They're going to fight it. They don't believe what will the doctor know, and they're going to do everything they can to get on top of that. And if someone gives them hope, or if something gives them hope, it's very hard to stay away from that.
Yeah, totally. Tim Minchin has a great line in one of his songs, I think it was, or a preamble to one of his songs, where he's talking about alternative medicine, and he said, "Do you know what alternative medicine that's been proven to work is called?"
Science.
Medicine.
I like it.
But what about, so not necessarily someone with a major diagnosis, but where my mum would always use it is pain management. I've got a headache. How is the brain capable of doing basic pain management and things like that?
Yeah, definitely in that case.
Right.
Even at the simplest level, when someone has pain and then they're distracted, so their attention is focused on something else, and they don't register the pain. That's well described, and a lot of cognitive behavioural therapy is trying to tap into that. So whether there are distractions or mental methods of dealing with, that absolutely does work when it comes to pain. Yeah, and sometimes.
Do we know why?
Not strictly, but again, I think a big part of it comes down to perception and attention. So again, on one side we're seeing the whole world and experiencing the whole world, including the pain syndrome, and the other is what we're narrowly focused on. And the classic one in science that has been shown is that people have some sort of pain syndrome, and they're distracted, short or long term, by something else, by a mindset or an activity or something, or a hobby or something, and it takes their mind off the pain. They stop registering pain because they've got the phenomenon of attention's been directed elsewhere. So it'll be something to do, like that between the right and left hemisphere, but there's no question it works. How does it work?
It's one of those questions that it gets raised.
Yeah. But I for pain, it absolutely does work. There's some pain it doesn't work, but there's no question. People go and see a pain specialist. CBT, or cognitive behavioural therapy, is a big part of that, of managing that, and it works. Yeah.
That's fascinating. One thing that always blew my mind was that one of the biggest innovations in medical science was washing hands between surgeries. Is that? Sorry, you smiled as if to say no, that's not a thing.
No, I'm just really impressed that you've looked this up. Like I feel like you know that I'm a surgeon, and you've gone and looked at something to do with surgery and science, and you've put this question together. I think it's really impressive.
I generally don't pay attention to this shit, but I just Googled it. No, it's something I've always been fascinated by, is that the biggest, one of the the things that changed the outcome of surgery was simply learning to wash hands, which obviously to us in this modern age seems so ridiculous, but it was such a simple thing that had such a profound income on, and particularly childbirth as well, I believe. Is it possible that there is something in our future that people will look back on and go, do you know that in 2022 they didn't even realize this simple thing? Is it possible that there's such a simple thing that we haven't overlooked, that we've overlooked up until now?
I think that's definitely going to happen. It happens with knowledge. Like, it happens with knowledge now. Like, something I know now, 20 years ago, you're like, did they really believe that? Is that what they thought 20 years ago? Really?
Yeah.
Stupid. You're like these professors of neurosurgery. Stupid. Yes, absolutely. That will absolutely happen. There's no question about that. The hand washing thing is fast. That's, you know, being aseptic was a. There were a couple of really big things in surgery. One was localization, being able to tell which part of the brain does what, and therefore be able to work out which part of the brain to operate on. Anesthesia was another big turning point in surgery, and that story is fantastic. Like, that's a fantastic story. Just very quickly, anesthesia.
I'd love to hear that.
Or just 2 second story. They used to use alcohol.
You can be longer. You know, I've got time, right?
Well, they used to use alcohol for anesthesia, right? But it wasn't the patient, because, you know, alcohol numbs pain, right?
Yeah.
And we've all been drunk, and we wake up next morning, there's blood pouring out of our leg or something. Like, what the hell happened there? I didn't feel that.
Yeah.
So they used alcohol, but the patient didn't get the alcohol back in the old days. It used to be the surgeon used to take the alcohol. So they were like, just hang on a second, laddie, I'm just going to have a swig of this whiskey to calm my nerves, and then I'll get back to your operation. Are you good to go?
Mike, when was this?
It was back in 1800s. They used to, the surgeon used to take the swig, and the poor old patient didn't get any.
Oh my God. You're kidding.
Yeah. But anesthesia was a big one. And then aseptic technique, or, you know, sepsis. The biggest one by far when it comes to infection was antibiotics. You know, when in the 1940s antibiotics were invented, and we have level 1 evidence. It's the highest evidence you can have for anything in surgery. It's one of the few things in surgery that has level 1 evidence, and that is antibiotics at the beginning of the operation significantly reduces infection.
Right. Yeah.
But and the first guy, when it comes to hand washing, he did hand washing. He used gloves and a gown, and I don't recall the date, but it wasn't that. I think it was late 1800s. He did that. He was ridiculed. He was a well-respected surgeon. He was ridiculed by his mates, going, "What the frig are you wearing? What's with the gloves and the gown?" Because they used to do like surgical demonstrations, and they'd have their open, their hands, and then an apron on, and that was pretty much it. It's like gloves and a gown. Like, what is this stupidity?
I mean, it's so mind-blowing to us in this day and age.
Yeah, but isn't it a great example of just accumulation of knowledge, standing on the shoulders of giants, and just eventually we get to the point where we are at the moment.
But was that, to a certain extent, was that just dumb luck? Or did he have a theory that there were things that we couldn't see that could have been causing infection? Yeah,
that is exactly what it is. These guys, you read the history of this, and like I read the biography of these guys, and there's one common pattern, and that is they were curious about something, but they then went and investigated it. Like they actually decided to sit down and spend 5 years, 10 years actually trying to work something out and trying to figure something out. The guy who was able to visualize the brain cell for the first time, he spent 20 years perfecting that technique because he was curious about something.
Can you describe what that is, visualizing the brain cell?
Well, for a very long time, no one knew what the brain was made of. It's just this white, mushy stuff. So they didn't even know if it was composed of cells. So for a very long time, the Egyptians, for example, thought the brain just produced snot. So when they mummified someone in Egyptian times, they used to get a hook up the nose and hook the brain out the nose and chuck it away. It was completely disregarded. Even the heart, the lungs, the intestines were all put in a jar, and beside the mummified body, the brain was just cast out. And for a long time, the brain wasn't even considered important. And then it was its importance was sort of slowly increased. But Cajal, Cajal, is a Spanish guy who's really the first guy in the late 1800s to be able to do a special stain on the brain and look at it under a microscope and show that the brain is composed of cells. And that was just earth-shattering because it was just this white, mushy stuff. And just look at it under a microscope, just white, mushy stuff with some weird stuff in it. And no one could tell what the hell it was. And he perfected this stain. And he got a Nobel Prize for it. And so he should have done.
Wow.
But he was really the first one to say this is all these different types of brain cells, and he was able to draw them and publish them, and it's like a story in itself. I just finished his biography. It's phenomenal. It's like one of the greatest books I've read probably in the last 12 months. This Spanish guy from a very poor background and rose to eminence in Spain is just incredible. But that was persistence. So back to this thing, he was curious about something and just kept persisting at it. I mean, even Einstein said the same thing. He said, I'm not smart, I'm just curious, and I stick at something for 10 years, And that's...
I think people lose sight of how recent that history is. I mean, the fact that this stuff's happening only 140, 150 years ago. And, I suppose to a lot of people, 150 years is a long time, but we know that in our human evolution, it's nothing. When you extrapolate forward 150 years, so if we go back to say the hand washing, the great hand washing discovery and the sepsis. Okay, first of all, I'd like you just obviously you're not going to be held to this. It's just a fun little guessing game based on your knowledge and experience. How much longer will humans be performing the physical surgery?
So the robot, you mean?
Well, yeah. I don't mean when are the robots going to come and take us over. I mean, because at the moment, obviously, a lot of surgery is assisted. It's all assisted with technology, but in your field, you're very hands-on. There are some surgeries that I'm guessing the surgeon isn't even present for the surgery, not necessarily on the brain.
It's really impressive, the research you've done for this. Yeah,
it's exactly not right. Research, it's just kind of general curiosity, I suppose.
Okay, well, you're spot on. So there is... The prostate is the big one. So they've invented a robot to do prostate surgery, and that was massive because prior to, I think, in 1960, they didn't even know where the nerves were in the prostate for bladder and erectile function. Right. So they used to take out a prostate for prostate cancer. They just reef out those nerves with it, and these men, their bladder function's gone and their erectile function's gone. And then someone decided, right, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to work out this nerves. What's the anatomy of these nerves? And they did that. They published it. And then they got better at nerve-sparing surgery to remove the prostate. And then they came up with this robot called the Da Vinci. There's others, but one of them is called the Da Vinci robot. And that was phenomenal because it could get down in a tight space. It got 7 degrees of motion of freedom, not 6, but actually 7. And they were able to remove these prostates with the robot with very, very good results. And then the question became, well, can we use a robot for other stuff? And we've tried in neurosurgery, and our robot's pathetic. So the urologists with their prostate surgery, their robot looks like a freaking robot, looks like a freaking spider with arms coming in everywhere.
Yeah.
They almost want to talk to it. And you're absolutely right. They're in a separate room with the controls, and they're doing it. And it's fabulous. But for neurosurgery, no, it's always been 2 hands, binocular vision, bimanual operation. And I think the big reason is that there's no natural space in the brain or the spine. So in the abdomen, you can blow the abdomen up and there's a space. So you can, stuff can move, like robotic hands can move around. But in the spine, in the brain, there's no natural space. So it makes it slightly difficult. But we do have a robot for spine. But it's pathetic. It's like a little hydraulic arm that sits on the side of the bed. And you can just place a screw for putting a screw in the spine through it. It's really pathetic. The robot I want is the one where I'm at Noosa on the beach And my robot's like doing the operation, done, and then he goes off, and then he goes and parks himself in the corner and charges himself up for the next operation. That's the robot I want. We don't have that.
I was just thinking, imagine if the guy that invented that incredible robot that puts a screw in a spine was listening to this podcast, and you're like, it's pathetic. It's just... I want to be on the beach in Noosa.
I'm actually really cynical about it because, the problem with this, it's law of diminishing returns. So much money is spent on the robot for the spine. And now if this hospital has a robot but that one doesn't, then that hospital is at a commercial disadvantage because they can't advertise the fact they have a robot, and patients won't know whether the robot actually means it's good or not good. It's a gimmick. It really is. Like there's a curve, right? There was money spent and there was a big inflection on the curve. Money spent, huge benefit to the patient, and then it gets to the top part of the curve where it flattens out. Huge amount of money spent, tiny incremental benefit to the patient. So and that's where we are with the robot until we get the actual one that can do the whole operation without me being there.
Yeah. So, in 50 years' time, are you going to be, assuming your hands worked and everything, are humans going to be doing the operation, do you think?
I won't be doing the operation, mate, because I'll well and truly be retired on Noosa Beach by then in 50 years' time.
Yeah. You'll be on stage at Wembley. That's right. Playing drums.
Well, is it possible? If I think about the technology, the father of modern neurosurgery, 1920s. Microscope, 1960s. Endoscope, 1990s. Endovascular treatment of aneurysms, phenomenal. Early 2000s. So, the technology is very, very recent. And, now a junior registrar in neurosurgery can get a better outcome than the master, father of neurosurgery back in 1920. With all his experience. So, it wouldn't surprise me. 50 years is a long time for technology, from a technology point of view.
Yeah, it really is. A bit of a silly question, but I'm just really curious. When you're at a party and someone says, "What do you do?" How do people react when they hear what you do?
Michael, I don't tell them because I don't know how to say it right, because it's just sort of so socially awkward, isn't it? So I say I work in health, and then I ask them what they do, and then I divert the conversation, and it's all done.
That's so. What you're trying to tell me is you've never been at a party where you've said I work in health, and the person, you've never had a situation where they've said, "Oh, in what area of health do you work? What's it like?"
Yeah, I've got a fallback. I say, I'm just in the I'm just medical. And so, what do you do?
Is that right?
Yeah.
So you just don't. It doesn't come up in what happens when you first tell people this is what you do? And I understand there's probably modesty there, and there's a whole bunch of things going on. I imagine that everyone must have this holy fucking shit kind of reaction. Is that accurate?
No.
I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
It's not accurate. I mean, what you say? What if I ask you what you do? What do you say?
I try and milk it for as much as I can.
Okay.
I just say I'm a musician, and if they ask further, I'll say I'm a music producer. But generally, that leads to follow-up questions. What do you play? What do you do? What kind of music? It's something that we all kind of have a shared love of.
I don't know what's difficult about it. Like an Uber driver is a classic one. What do you do? Oh, I'm medical. Oh, what sort of medical? Oh, I'm in the surgical space. Oh, what sort of surgeon are you? Oh, I do neuro. Neuro, what's that? Oh, it's brain and spine. Bloody hell, mate, that's incredible. And that's usually the standard conversation. It's like, well, what do you say?
Right.
I do neurosurgery, but for me, it's not that big of a deal at all. It's just like everyday life. And so I don't actually really like talking about it. So I actually find other people more interesting.
Yeah.
I find what you do more interesting.
Well, I can definitely tell you that
Oh, sorry, you don't do anything interesting. You just play the keyboard. That's right. You don't actually playing the keyboard in producing. You don't actually do anything at all.
No,
so,
I don't do anything.
That's just
do anything
definition of being irrelevant, isn't it? Just playing the keyboard in the band, isn't it?
Well, I mean, look, it was in that case, and I know what you're referring to. I kind of look at it as being a musician and creating music is performing something. I think that's important, even just on a cosmic level, and I don't mean to get too far out there, but I just think there's enough shit that's being put out into the world by people that the more people that are putting beauty back in, the better. I mean, the cliche is, oh well, it's not brain surgery. So you literally have the occupation that is the cliched, smartest possible job to have. Other than the humility, is there a part of you that just doesn't, that you don't want to, I don't know. I'm fascinated by the fact that you don't tell people that you're a fucking neurosurgeon and it makes you awkward.
I think that's probably more a reflection of me than the career. Like, it is a fascinating career, but
of course,
it's like, what do you say? I think it's because it's like the good part of neurosurgery is it's nuanced. Like, it's hard to describe what it's like to appreciate anatomy and to be in the zone during an operation. Like, that for me is a feeling. Like, it's very hard to put that into words. And it's a little bit of a strange concept, I suppose, as well. And then there is obviously the stigma associated with it. But,
interesting that you see it as a stigma.
Stereotype?
Yeah. Do you prefer talking to a layperson such as myself who is asking pretty basic questions, or do you prefer talking to other experts in the field and really getting into the nitty-gritty and sharing your information with each other and exchanging ideas?
Colleagues is fun because there's obviously that innate understanding there, but I much prefer this. So when you're asking me about the split in the brain, that for me is the ideal conversation. I love that because that allows me to sort of tap into what I love about it, and hearing someone else being inquisitive about a part of the brain that's a conversation I'll very, very happily have.
Wow.
Tell me about the left and the right part of the brain. Tell me about is it actually split in half? Tell me about the balanced part of the brain. Like, the conversations with lay people, interested lay people, like you're above. Well, you're a very, very interesting lay person to speak to about the brain. So this makes it very interesting.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's from the moment that I knew, and we have a mutual friend, the beautiful David Richards, and he's spoken so highly of you over the years, and he's always said you guys you have to meet each other, you'll get on really well. But from the moment he told me about you, I was absolutely fascinated to ask all these questions. And I think what you're doing is just extraordinary. Do you ever pinch yourself?
No, I don't. I forget how lucky and privileged I am. It was more evident when I was trying to pass the milestones. When I tried to get into medical school, and I did, that was a wow. When I tried to get into neurosurgical training program, and there was 160 people, and 6 of us get on, and I get on. That's like, wow, And then I passed the exam on the first attempt, and it goes well, and I'm qualified, and like, wow. So like those milestones are really like, I pinch myself and go, this is fabulous. But now then obviously it's just a normal day experience. But occasionally an operation comes along where it's like, it reminds me this is pretty. Like I had a lady with a spinal tumour. She had one on either side, right and left. And doing that operation was, this is good. This is what I enjoy doing. This is I'm really, really appreciative of the position I'm in right now to do this. But there's a lot of There's a lot of mundane stuff. There's a lot of what would be the equivalent of your editing, I suppose.
Yeah. That's so true. Yeah.
Yeah.
In those moments when you've got her and she's got the two tumors, can you allow yourself to feel the responsibility of the moment, or that's got to be shut out and you've just got to be laser focused?
Laser focused, but it's almost impossible not to feel it. So it was very different as a registrar when I was training, because somebody else carried the ultimate responsibility, like the buck stopped with them. As a registrar, you're much more confident than perhaps you should be. But when you become a consultant, you are the end of the line. The buck stops with you. Then you are laser focused on what you're doing, but you also feel the weight of, if something goes wrong here, I'm the one who has to deal with it. And so in this spinal tumor, it was really suits my aptitude. It was microsurgical, it was anatomy, it was technically difficult, and I loved that. But I'm looking at the spinal cord right there, going, if I injure that, that's big problems, and I'll have to live with the fact that she's got a spinal cord injury. And so
how close are you to the spinal cord at that point?
Oh, I'm on it. I've got a paddy on it. I'm literally sitting on top of it. So if you're cutting the tumor with the tumors are
a physical knife, or
it's a physical knife. Yep, the tumors
not lasers. And excuse my ignorance.
Yeah, we've got blue light lasers and other sort of Star Wars lightsabers. No,
that's all I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to disappoint you, but it's a blade. Well, there is actually one. We got something called a CUSA. So it stands for Cavitron Ultrasonic Aspirator, and it's brilliant. So
I would have guessed that.
Yeah. Well, it takes a long time to set up. So the other thing is can't use straight away. That's what the surgeon thinks it stands for, because they have 15 minutes to set it up. But it's this tiny little tip, and it atomizes the tissue, the tumor, and then sucks it. So you literally just put it on the tumor, and the tip of it breaks down the tissue and then sucks the tissue. So it fragments it. Wow. So it's a beautiful way of very delicately, hoovering up tumor. So I do a lot of that. So get a knife, open up. I call it the witch's cauldron. So open up the capsule, gut out the centre of the tumour, and then there is what looks like a cauldron. Then collapse that down on itself, so it's a really small bundle, and then out it comes.
Wow. How far from kind of working out how to get rid of tumours before they start are we?
Well, that would come down to screening. So that's really difficult. There are good screening, like the bowel cancer screening is incredible. Prostate screening, again, fabulous. That catches stuff early. Catch it early, you can do something about it. But the problem with screening in public health is you'll get a lot of false positives, or you'll get a lot of results that you have to deal with, so incidental findings. So if I was to do a brain scan on everybody every year, someone will have a bump on an artery, which normally would mean nothing, but all of a sudden they've got a bump on the artery, right? And they're going to be terrified about this bump on the artery. Yeah. Or there's a little white spot in their brain, which, I wouldn't even think twice about, but suddenly the patient's got a white spot on their brain. They've got cancer, but got the... So this is the problem with the public health campaigns is, yes, you're looking for something. If you find it, fantastic, but, what are you going to do with all the other things you find as well? Like, and how do you manage that? And what do they mean? Yeah. And do they need to be followed up? So
interesting, right?
So a blood test for brain cancer, that would be fantastic. But at the moment, it's the old-fashioned way. It happens, it occurs, and then people get symptoms or a headache, and then they present. So it'd be great, because if you catch it early, you could probably do a better job. But I think that's a long way off. Yeah.
How much? How much does your job and your knowledge of the brain, does that give you any insight whatsoever into mental health?
No. Well, sort of, but not really. So mental health has been looked at with functional MRI. Where is the depression part of the brain? What's going on in psychosis? And I'll be honest here, I find psychiatry. I don't find psychiatry very interesting. So, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. They're not things I'm primarily interested in. So, when I think about the brain, I think about structure really, and then trying to work out how bloody consciousness works. That's interesting.
Yeah.
But it's certainly been looked at. It's there's a thought that we could use deep brain stimulation for psychiatric disorder. For example, we can use deep brain stimulation for something like Parkinson's disease. So people can have really bad tremor from Parkinson's or be affected if this tiny probe goes into a millimetre perfect spot in the brain, and we know where that is, and we stimulate it or destroy it, and the tremor disappears and their quality of life significantly improves. So if someone is depressed or is schizophrenic, is there a similar spot in the brain we could stimulate, and that would significantally improve it, not cure it, but improve their quality of life? I mean, there was the horror frontal lobotomy. Was it lobotomy? No, it was basically they destroyed the frontal lobes in people with mental health disorders. So destroying the frontal lobes basically just turns them into a zombie. So they go from being stark raving mad to being completely placid, and that was considered a cure.
Yeah.
But
and when was that? Like, we're talking 60s, right? I mean, we're not talking 100 years ago. We're talking pretty recent history.
Correct, yeah.
70s,
I can't remember the exact
60s,
decade.
70s.
I can't remember the exact decade, but yeah, it's certainly within living memory. Horrific. Horrific.
And
But
so I suppose, I mean, God, you've only got so much brain power, and focusing on mental health. It's just a conversation that I think has become normalized, thank God.
Yeah.
Because, we all have our various states of mental health. And there are so many different factors that contribute to our mental health state. I was just wondering, what the correlation is physically and but that's okay. That's cool.
It's hugely important. I think it's it's great that it has been normalised. It's now in the public consciousness. It talks about this, mental health, depression, anxiety. But in terms of what's going on, I'm not the man to ask.
Are there a lot of people doing research into that, whether there's a physical way of fixing these depression, for example, and anxiety?
Yeah, I don't know. I know that it was looked at in the DBS, so the deep brain stimulation literature. They looked at everything, from Parkinson's to high blood pressure to thought and mood disorders. Absolutely. Addiction was another big one they were looking at. Imagine being able to solve addiction with deep brain stimulation. Someone's smoking, gone, or alcohol, whatever it might be. So it is an active area of research because there's, to say the obvious, there's obviously huge commercial interest in finding this magical part of the brain. But there are definitely people looking at it. I know quite well the guy in Perth is looking at deep brain stimulation for a number of movement disorders, but there are similar people around the world doing it for psychiatric conditions. Absolutely, I just don't know very much about it.
How many people are there in your space around the world? Are we talking thousands or hundreds?
I think there's 200 in Australia.
Okay.
There's 6,500 surgeons in total in Australia. I think about 200 of those are neurosurgeons. I have to check those numbers.
Right.
I'm not sure about that.
Is there a bit of a kind of a camaraderie between the neurosurgeons, or is there a rivalry?
Well, this is this. So if you're not operating in the same territory, all get along beautifully. But if we're all if we're in the same geographical territory, then it becomes a little bit. I feel like surgery is self-selecting for certain personalities. That's just the reality. So the worst bit is when a patient goes for a second opinion. So they'll see you and then they'll go and see someone else for a second opinion.
Right.
That is where the true colours come out. Oh, such and such, they don't know what they're talking about. I know what's the best thing. This is what we should.
Yeah.
So those stories are interesting. Like some of the worst behaviour I saw was one surgeon talking badly about another surgeon behind their back, and I witnessed that and I thought that looks bad. I just don't like that. It looks really, really bad. Right. And so I've made a huge effort when I get someone for a second opinion to have, obviously full respect for the other person's made the opinion, and just to not be a dick about it, basically. But it's incredibly easy to fall into that trap of doing that, particularly if you don't agree with the other opinion that the patient's had, to remain professional and objective. But well, man, there's some there's some guys out there who are quite happy to express their opinions.
Right. Well,
we're civil. Put it that way. We're civil.
You know how you were talking before about how being a musician must be like a dream.
Go on. Is it not? Are you? Do you hate each other?
No. No.
Okay.
The second opinion, quite often, as a music producer, is my artist will be working on a song, and one day they'll come in and say, I played it to my mum and she said the vocals aren't loud enough. That's the second opinions that I have to deal with are friends and family that know nothing about making records. But the difference is they do know about music, because we all know at the end of the day, music is something that affects you in whatever way it affects you. And I'm not right because I like Radiohead over, some other band that I can't, like Muse, for example. Sorry, I hate to bring it up, and I've learnt not to bring the M word up. But I'm not right. It's just, so getting those second opinions in music, it's frustrating as fuck when it's like my mum thinks that my voice should be louder. But that's not something you're going to have to deal with. Oh, my sister reckons you shouldn't use the functional MRI because that's, bullshit machine.
Well,
my sister really likes the robot. Bad. Yeah. Well, yeah. So do you have to deal with that with people who've Googled it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I actually encourage it. I say, good for you. It's all about getting their attention back to where it should be, right? So
right.
I'm really pleased you looked it up because you're being proactive. That's really, really... And I mean that. They're being proactive about their health. Your health's your number one asset. You've got to be proactive about it. And then I sort of go to sort of reorientate them and just sort of reassert the hierarchy. So I'll talk about the scan and I'll show them I know what the scan looks like. But I also take great lengths to have them understand the scan, because I feel if they understand what I'm talking about rather than just taking my word for it, then they're on my side. Well, not on my side, but they understand my opinion, or my opinion becomes more than just words; it becomes a feeling. So I show them the scan and get better and better at describing to them in simple words, in just short phrases, so they can understand it. So they look at the scan and go, "Oh, okay, so I actually see what you're talking about there." And then I explain the solution or the treatment options in really simple terms or really mechanical terms. So again, they go, okay, so I see that's the problem, and it makes sense that that's how you solve the problem. And that's the point I'm aiming for. And look, if they don't use me at the end of the day, at least they've got, the cards on the table and they understand, they can make an informed decision. But usually I find if they can understand what I'm saying, not just hear what I'm saying, then usually they're pretty happy with that. And the other sort of outside opinions tend to dissolve.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I reckon from now on, when you meet someone and they say, what do you do? Say you're a drummer and see what happens then.
I like that. But the problem is, though, Michael, see, I wanted to be a drummer, a professional drummer. That was my number one thing in life, I wanted to be a professional drummer. And I didn't become a professional drummer because I wasn't good enough. And that still hurts me. It still hurts me. So if I'm going to pretend to be the thing that I wanted to be, I feel like
Right. Okay. It's like rubbing a little bit of salt into your own wound.
I'm just like a kid still just dreaming about this fantasy of being a pro drummer.
So is there any regret there whatsoever?
It's the regret is that it's unexplored. I think that's the big thing. Like I think exploring stuff is great because then you either know that something was going to work out or it wasn't, and because it's unexplored territory. Like I know that I wasn't going to be good enough because there were people in my town who were at the conservatorium and I watched them play and they're like, they just had something that I didn't have, whether it was speed or just a better innate sense of rhythm or whatever it might be. But I could be the wood chopper, I just keep the real good groove going in some sort of country thing, and I felt like I was creative, and it's like always felt from a kid. Like I'm the classic story, I get my kid at 7, my dad plays the piano, we live where there's no one else, and then I join a band, and then I go and be the drummer for Jay-Z, or be the Oasis drummer, or play for Keith Urban or something like It should have happened, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, I talk to a lot of people who say, "Oh, I wish I'd, kept up my music," or "I wish I'd tried music as a career." And I always say to them, "That's all fine, but you have no idea where that journey would have taken you. You might have been dead within 6 months from a fucking overdose, and you've never taken drugs in your life. But had you gone down that path." People just romanticize the musical career so much.
Yeah, I've done that. I've absolutely romanticized. That's exactly the right word. But now I can be a musician for the fun of it. Like I can just play for fun. But God, it's good. I think it's probably being on stage. I think that's interesting to hear what you say because you've gone down the producer pathway. But there's something about being on stage. That is just on a different dimension. There's something magical about that.
I 100% agree. Although I would choose the studio over playing live personally, and I think one of the reasons for that is that. I think I've lost you. Have I lost you?
No, you're back. You're back.
Ah, nice.
I don't understand why you say that. Like,
well. I've probably done 4,000 cover gigs in my life, and probably 3,800 of them I hated.
Oh man!
Okay,
that actually makes me sad.
No, look, okay,
it's like you're doing something you love, but you're doing it in a place that that you don't love. That is
no. Look, that's not fair. That I shouldn't put it that way. That's not fair to what I do. Let me put it another way. In the studio, I never feel anything other than creative freedom and the ability to explore these creative concepts and musical concepts. And I feel like the artist's always really excited, and we get excited about making music together. And then, I play live and I put my heart and soul into every performance of every song, and at the end of the song, you finish it, and when no one claps in a room, that breaks my fucking heart every time.
That's
breaks
brutal.
My heart. Yeah,
that is just having a breakup every song, isn't it?
Totally. I've got a great friend of mine who's a great guitarist and singer and artist, a guy Dan Romeo, and he says, "Oh man, when I do those covers gigs, I just look at it as a paid rehearsal, and I just look inwards and I just play, and I have a good time just playing music for myself if no one's listening." And I really admire that and am envious of that, because for me, it's a dagger every single time. And that's just the reality for me. And I don't get those feelings in the studio very often. Every now and then, an idea might get rejected, or and that's fine, because that's part of that creative process. But I look at playing gigs, I look at part of that process being you perform and the audience reacts. And when you get nothing back from the audience, it just kills me every time.
What about an originals gig?
I enjoy originals gigs in general, if I'm playing for other artists. If it's my own music, or my bands. Look, yeah, my band back in the day, you know, we were in our 20s and it was us against the world. Used to love it then. And playing original music's great. It's much better. It's just, you know, I had this guy came up to me once. He was this high school reunion was on at the Kirribilli Hotel where I play regularly. And these guys came in like 3/4 of the way through my gig, and there's like 4 or 5 different rooms in the venue, and they all come into the room where I was. This guy comes up and says, "Mate, we're trying to have a conversation. Can you turn down?" And I just looked at him. And I just went, "No," and kept playing, right? And as he walked away, I went, "Hey, mate." And he turned around and went, "I'm trying to do a gig here. See all the other rooms in the venue where there isn't live music, where you won't have to tell the musician to turn down? Go to one of those rooms." That shit pisses me off, but, you know, whatever. I listened to a podcast that you were a guest on last night, and it was fabulous. You speak a lot about luck, and I love that because I'm a big believer in the role of luck. And so many people say, no, you create your own luck, and there's no such thing as luck. And it's generally people that have succeeded that say, yeah, you just work hard and that's all you got to do. Now, you're someone who has worked very, very hard to get where you are and have, you know, by any measure, you've had a successful career. What's your opinion on the role that luck plays in life?
Michael, I think about this a lot. I am fascinated and really interested in the role of luck in terms of an outcome.
Me too.
And I have some thoughts about it personally, but just more generally, quickly first, I read about it, and there's a fantastic book called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, another brilliant book. I recommend it to everybody. But he talks about luck because there's successful people like Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, you know, these people that have scaled to the top of the mountain. And the big question is how much of it was down to luck and how much of it was down to being a genius and how much of it was down to the grind. And he talks about a conversation also that he had with another economist, a very, very famous economist. And he said to this economist, you know a lot about the economy. What's the one thing that you don't know that you would really like the answer to? And this famous economist says, "Morgan, what I would like to know is what the percentage contribution luck is to an outcome." That's what I want to know.
Me too. Yeah.
And, you know, I just find it really interesting to read about luck. Part of me feels like I'm trying to make an excuse for not being somewhere that I want to be. Like I can just blame it on I was unlucky. So I think there's that.
Is that back to the drumming thing?
If I got really lucky, maybe something could have happened, you know. But
when you say you didn't get to the place where you wanted to be, is that what you meant?
I think it would have taken luck on top of what I did to make something out of it. I don't think there was any bad luck involved. But the luck for me is that, for example, like when I got into medical school, which was number one thing I had to do to become a neurosurgeon, I got in because the dean of the medical school happened to run into my anatomy tutor, and my anatomy tutor told him how brilliant I'd been in the anatomy tutorials. Wow. And so the dean rang me up and says, "Oh, look, you know, we're going to give you a spot." For me, that's just freaking lucky, right? Ran into me in the corridor and even mentioned my name. And then I, you know, talk about getting into neurosurgery. Well, you know, one of 6 out of 100 and I can't remember if it was 120 or 100, whatever it was, people. Like, yes, I can, you know, tick a CV and do well in an interview, but, you know, there is a lot of variables there that are outside my control. And to be told, okay, Alex, you're one of the 6 that's going to get in, I feel like there's luck because I see lots of people who don't get in and they don't get in the second year, and they've got lots of research up their belt, and they've worked hard, and they've done worked at this hospital and done well, and they don't get in the third year, and they don't get in the fourth year, and 5 years down the track, they're still trying to get into neurosurgery. And I look at them, and I think, well, there's actually no difference between me and you. I feel like we have the same aptitude, probably the same skill sets, done the work, but I got on first go, and it's 5 years down the track, and you're not on. So I just have to say, like, there are just some unaccounted variables for there that they just fell my way. Yeah. And then I feel like there's times where there's been, I've been unlucky as well, and mainly because I've not been able to account for it. But to answer your question, I think luck absolutely does play. Like this whole thing, like luck is where hard work meets opportunity. Yeah, to a degree. There's an out of it. Like let's take Bill Gates for example. So Bill Gates was born in a wealthy family. He was lucky that he was born into a wealthy family. His mother had knew one of the top execs in IBM, which is where Microsoft got their first go. He went to the only school in America that had a computer at the time. So the only school in America that had a computer, and he was born with a good brain. So you can't plan any of that.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, but a part of me, I'm really interested in luck because I just wanted to understand how lay luck works, like, how it works, but also how much of it I'm actually in control of and how much, like, for example, here's another one, Mr. Beast on YouTube. Mr. Beast has 100 million subscribers on YouTube, right? And he started from nothing, literally started from nothing.
Yeah.
And he always says, my advice is this to any young YouTuber, make 100 videos. That's my advice. And basically what he's saying is start and get better and better and better and better and better and better. And the better you get, then the rewards will start to come.
Yeah.
That's fine. Lots of people have 100 videos. Lots of people are getting better and better and better. And most of them won't ever have 100 million subscribers.
That's right.
So was it timing for him? Just in the right place at the right time? Just some, minutiae of a variable that, he's managed to collide with that's, jackpotted him into orbit. I can't define luck. I find it very, very interesting. I think I absolutely have been lucky. Like here's another one, Lex Friedman. I don't know if you know Lex Friedman podcast.
Yeah.
So he's one of many guys who teaches and researches AI at MIT. And on Quora, people saying, how did Lex get famous? There's heaps of people that could have, done YouTube channel on AI and self-driving cars and all that sort of stuff. And Lex actually responded to it on Quora himself. He said, look, I hear you. There are lots of great people. I just think that I've been lucky.
I love that.
So,
look, to me, that comes down to, when I was thinking about talking to you, in my head, you were going to demystify the entire universe. And one thing I've loved about this chat is that it's just as much of a mystery for you as it is for me. And the mystery and the mystery is what punched you in the back of the head during that surgery.
During the operation, yeah.
The mystery of where a song comes from, where a lyric or a poem, or where creativity comes from, the mystery of luck, just the dumb luck that we happen to be born now, let alone, the one thing I think, thank God I wasn't around 200 years ago, is dentistry. I cannot imagine having an infected tooth before modern dentistry. So I think it's a great place to say thank you so much for everything, because ultimately we're in this beautiful, beautiful, terrifying, mysterious universe that has allowed us to sit here and chat with each other using this incredible technology. And I think the fact that one of the questions I had for you, and it wasn't facetious, but it was a question. was, what is love? And I wondered whether you had a neurological. Well, we have seen, it just seems like the mystery is just as wonderful and beautiful for you as it is for little old me.
It absolutely is, and I enjoy the mystery because trying to chase that rabbit down the hole is one of the most enjoyable things I do. So, chasing the lady luck, trying to understand her, for me is currently the most enjoyable thing I do. Reading about the right and left side of the brain and trying to get a grip on what the latest thinking about that for me is a very, very enjoyable process. I'm very, very curious, and I probably won't get any answers. And I'm happy not to get the answers because I almost feel like the process of trying to work it out is the bit that's actually enjoyable. It's like, getting to the end of the gig's not what it's about. It's the actual gig itself. It's the actual doing it. And I feel like from the chasing curiosity by different channels is what I really, really enjoy. But it's been fab talking to you because your curiosity is right there, and you're interested and curious about exactly the same things. And I was kind of thinking you were going to give me the answers.
Well, we've both let each other down simultaneously, and also, strangely enough, given each other a bit of comfort.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful and humbling for me. Alex, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. It's been a treat. It's been an eye-opener. It's been very entertaining for me. Hopefully it's been entertaining for people listening and watching. And let's do this again. Do you ever drink, by the way?
I do, but I'm a very light drinker.
You'd have to be, right?
An alcoholic ginger beer for me is perfect.
Okay, well, one day you can come down to Foster, have an alcoholic ginger beer, and I'll have 10 of them, and we'll solve the world problem.
We'll do it, mate. I've found my partner in crime for working this shit out. This is going to be great.
I'd love that.
Yeah. Thanks, mate. Michael, mate. It's been brilliant, mate. I've really enjoyed it. That's great questions, great insight, great research. Thank you for all that. I really, really appreciate it.
Right back at you, my friend. Thank you so much.
See you, mate.